Hello and welcome to Diegetic Advancement. My name's Riley, and today I wanted to talk about what is the OSR. Despite what my analytics say, maybe there's someone who's listening who doesn't know what it is, and especially because I'm putting out content for OSR October and kind of my on gaming series, and most of my episodes are from the lens of the OSR. I kind of wanted to do a very quick overview and present my definition. For the lack of a better word, so that people can reference it. So what does OSR stand for first? It's an acronym meaning old school rules, old school revival, old school renaissance. There's a few different things, but for the most part, they all kind of mean the same thing. And you might be able to intuit what the OSR is about just from that, but there's some nuance that I guess isn't captured there. Next, a little bit of history, kind of the inception. So you've got two games at the inception. You've got OSRIC, which is published as a publishing vehicle for people to create content for AD&D legally and be able to reference something legally. You can't reference AD&D material. There's no method to do that. But with the open gaming license, OSRIC is created so that you can reference that instead and it be legal. So people can create content and use it in their AD&D games. The intention was people are playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons already, and they want to share stuff and they want to be able to buy stuff to use at their tables. However, at the time, AD&D is not available for purchase like it is today through drive-through. So a lot of people end up picking up OSRIC with the intention of using it to play. Right? A lot of new players who maybe played in the past or have never played it, but they don't own AD&D. So this is kind of the only way without paying lots of money on eBay to pick up the game. At the same time, Basic Fantasy RPG comes out, and that is BX in a way. Again, published using the OGL, references that so that it's legal. But it's also quite different than BX. There are some changes. One of those is Ascending Armor Class. That's kind of one of the sticking points for people looking at old school games. They look at this descending armor class, people joke about THACO. And so there are some changes in Basic Fantasy that are maybe more appealing to newer players or just kind of a little bit nicer or easier to use. And so that's the other kind of style. That is designed for people to play, right? That is a game that people should pick up. The intention was that they should pick that up and use that to play, whereas OSRIC this is purely a vehicle for you to publish modules for you to play with AD&D. And so that kind of presents two of the original definitions for the OSR. One is playing the old school rules, playing AD&D, playing BX, playing OD&D. And then the other definition is playing games or writing modules, creating content that is compatible with those, right? So Basic Fantasy you could use to play all the B modules, right? Because it's largely compatible. You'd have to convert Descending Armor Class to Ascending Armor Class, and there's tools for you to do that in the book. But there's the compatibility with TSR era D&D definition. So there's the first two. For the most part, toss those out. That's not what the OSR means anymore. And I think that's mostly a good thing. One, there's a focus on TSR era D&D, which means that playing Traveller isn't OSR in that definition, which doesn't make sense to me because there's no reference to TSR or D&D in the name OSR, and so it's not a very good name for those things. Those groups are useful, and I like those groups. Being able to buy something and say, oh, I know what system this is for and what group of systems I could actually use to run this. Or buying a game system and go, oh, cool, I could keep on the Borderlands with this, for example. So they're useful groups. The name's not good for it. And so that gets tossed out. Kind of the heart of what the OSR is and what's made it what it is today is the blogosphere, which is kind of dead these days, unfortunately, and Google+. Lots of people are running games, talking about their games, creating stuff for their games, all old school games, all on the blogosphere. And there's a lot of activity around it, and that kind of reinvigorates the games and brings new players in and all sorts, right? And so there's that. In that, there's a few attempts to kind of define what the OSR is and what they're even talking about. There's probably more attempts to do that than you could count. And I'll link to some of them in the show notes, which if you're interested for further reading, certainly worth your time. But effectively, what it boils down to is that the OSR is a romanticized version of the playstyle of old school D&D, and maybe even an evolution on that playstyle in some cases. And so what is that playstyle? Again, those blog posts will kind of talk about it, and there are some things in there that in the context of the blog posts I kind of agree with, but there are some caveats which I'll mention. But for me, the OSR is primarily challenge-based play, which means that the goal is, well, we're playing a game, and the whole point of it is to overcome challenges, and that's why it's fun, right? Most other games that are fun for the same thing. Escape rooms are fun because you're overcoming challenges. It's not an escape room, but you kind of see my point. And to make challenge-based play fun, right? Like, because let's say I put 20 orcs in a room, and I say, and that's a challenge. So that is a challenge, right? But if I just plop your characters down and say, all right, now roll your attacks and this, that, and the other, it's not really a challenge. We've just completely handed that off to the dice. The GM probably didn't need to be there. The players didn't actually need to be there either. So what was the point? It's not actually engaging. So to make challenge-based play engaging, the thing that you need is player agency. And so the OSR playstyle is challenge-based play with an emphasis on player agency. I think you can put a full stop there in a way, because anything else that you add starts to exclude things that someone's going to say is OSR. And to me, it's kind of a compelling definition of a game. You know, if you said, that's what we're going to play, I'd be like, yes, I want to play that. If you said, I want to play a story game, and you define that some way, I'm probably going to say, no, I don't want to play that. And that's a personal preference, not a shot at story games. And so there's a couple of things on player agency that I kind of want to talk about very quickly in the scope of this discussion. So high lethality is often thought of as a OSR maximum, a part of the definition. I disagree. It's not for me. What is there are consequences to your actions, right? There must be consequences to your actions to have player agency. And for those consequences to be meaningful, right, high lethality is a way for that for there to be consequences, right? But you don't need high lethality or even lethality at all. You just need consequences. And both positive and negative. You should be able to make an impact on the game world with your actions. They should mean something. You know, when you win, you should win. And when you lose, you should lose. Next is rulings, not rules. A lot of people have taken that to mean rules light, which is fine. Rules light games can be OSR games. Rules heavy games can also be OSR games. I think what the key is that the referee, which is the game master, needs to be able to adjudicate actions that fall outside the rules with that emphasis on player agency. And so, as an example, you might have a roll to search a room, but if the player just says, I look under the bed, and you look at your notes for the room description that you've written down for your module, and that's where the pile of gold is hidden, you don't make them roll. Right? There's no roll needed. You found it. Despite there being a rule for it, you don't need to use it because it's not what the intention of the rule is. And the same thing, just because it's not a rule for something doesn't mean the players can't do it. Again, that's where the referee needs to come in and adjudicate using the rules as guidelines. For an example, a lot of people say that like OD&D does not have skill checks, and yet you've got the forcing doors, right? And there's even a metric for applying your ability modifiers to that check. And off the top of my head, I can't remember because it's different in various rule sets and probably in different retro clones and this, that, and the other. But let's say that your standard check to force a stuck door is 2 in 6. You roll a d6 on a 1 or a 2, it opens. And if you've got a strength of 13, let's say, you add a +1 to that. Then you decide, well, I want to climb this wall. Let's say we don't have thieves. Well, 2 and 6, plus or minus your dex, right? You can use the tools that are available to adjudicate, the tools that are available in the rules to adjudicate things that are kind of not described. I feel like there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about. Maybe it's, the player skill, not character abilities. I think, again, correct in the context that it's applied, and through player agency, your player needs to be making decisions and doing things, not your character all the time, right? And so, like I said, for the search, the player that has the initiative to think about the room as a real space and think about where something might be hidden and say that they're looking there, they find it, rather than like thinking that the only way to search a room is through your character sheet. Right? There's other ways to interact with the game. But you've got equipment on your character sheet, you've got spells on your character sheet, you've got your attributes, your skills, you've got so many things on your character sheet that are important to interacting with the world, but it's not the only method of interacting with it, I think, is the important part. Okay, I've gone on far too long for a quick definition of the OSR, but I hope it's been helpful to someone who's listening who might not be familiar, or at least to give a brief summary of my thoughts on, or my definition on the OSR, which in summary, I'll reiterate, is simply a play style which is challenge-based and emphasizes player agency. Thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.